Hello and welcome to Newsroom. We're live from Islamabad and I'm Sharmeen Ali. After we saw that there was a peace agreement between the US and the Taliban last Saturday, and then there was a resumption of attacks by the Taliban in which in the last 24 hours alone, the Taliban have conducted 33 attacks in 16 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces, killing civilians and soldiers alike. And also, President Trump had a 35-minute phone conversation with the Taliban leader Mullah Brother, and also we are also seeing that the prisoner exchange has become a sort of a delay that is occurring between the intra-Afghan dialogue, which is now becoming a crucial point. We'll be talking about that in our program today with our guests in the studio and who will be joining us online. And also the US and Pakistan need to focus on broadening their partnership, according to Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, Pakistan's ambassador at large for foreign investments. And he also said that Pakistan and the United States should not just have a security-based relationship, but should also focus on trade and investment. Also, another development which we don't normally see, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has joined the petition against the Citizenship Amendment Act in India in the Supreme Court. And the Indian authorities have responded by saying that this is an internal matter of India. So we'll be talking about that as well. And another story which is recently erupted is a writer who, Mr. Khalilur Rahman Qamar, on a program, news program yesterday, started to talk to a human rights activist in very unbecoming language and hurled abuses at her. Now, the question here is not the issue itself which is being discussed, but the way the woman was spoken to, and this lady, the type of language that she had to be subjected to. All of social media has condemned this, and also due to the fact that it's also the channel and the anchor person in charge over there to contain such language on a TV channel and on a news program. It should definitely not be allowed. Such misogynistic and anti-feminine remarks are just absolutely unacceptable. And PEMRA has also issued a show cause notice to the TV channel NEO because of the use of the vulgar language. We'll be talking about that as well. So we've come to our first topic, which is the Afghanistan situation right now as it stands. It's at a very crucial stage, and talks are to begin on March 10th between the Taliban and the Afghanistan government. We're going to talk about that now with our guests. We've got with us in our studios Air Commodore Basit Raza Abbasi, who's a senior analyst. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on our program. We also have with us on Skype Ms. Amna Khan, who's a senior research fellow at the Institute of Strategic Studies, and her area of interest is Afghanistan. Thank you, Amna Khan, for joining us online. Amna, are you able to hear me? Have we connected with you properly? Right, sir. Let me begin with you while they get the connection with Amna going. Now, the intra-Afghan dialogue is to take place in the next coming few days, March 10th. And prior to that, one of the crucial agreements was a prisoner release that was agreed upon between the US and Taliban. But it seems right now that there are two different declarations that took place. One was with the US and the Taliban. The other one was with the US and the Afghan government. And they're not really on the same page.
Very right. Actually, this has created this confusion. If you look at these two agreements, one was the agreement between the US government and the Taliban, rather I would say Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, because that's what they call themselves. And that is what the title of the agreement is, between United States of America and Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So that was the one agreement which we all know, peace agreement, which we all talk about. And the other was an agreement by the US government and the Afghan government, which was released from Kabul.
Right.
So the language is not sort of the same, and that has created the confusion.
One of with the US and Taliban, the agreement was that the prisoner release will take place. 5,000 Taliban prisoners will be released from Bagram base in Afghanistan prior to the 10th talks in Oslo, and 1,000 of Afghan prisoners are going to be released by the Taliban. But however, we're seeing that the other declaration between the United States and the Afghan government says that the Afghan government will facilitate such release of prisoners, but it doesn't give the precondition to the 10th March talks?
Actually, if you see the peace agreement signed between United States of America and Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, it has 4 basic points which are interconnected. The first point is that an assurance, an ironclad assurance that the Afghan soil will not be used for any attack or against the interest of United States of America and its allies. And then the second point is that the withdrawal of all foreign troops, this word all is very important, from Afghan soil, because there was a feeling that perhaps some American forces will be retained. So this, it talks about all Afghans, all foreign troops from Afghan soil. And if these 2 conditions are met, then the third condition follows, which is an inter-Afghan dialogue, and that is to start on 10th March. And in between this time, 29th February and 10th March, 5,000 Taliban prisoners who are in the custody of Afghan government, and 1,000 of the Afghan forces personnel who are in custody of Taliban.
Right.
So these were to be released by 10th March as per the language of the peace agreement. And it is contradictory to the agreement signed between USA and Afghan government.
Right.
And that has created the confusion. But again, let me tell you that the onus of this is on America, because Taliban have not talked to the Afghan government. And whatever Afghan government says, USA has to take care of it. So I feel that Taliban are still standing by the agreement. There is no violation from their side, because here you remember one thing more. This was not a ceasefire agreement, because I have talked about 3 out of the 4 points. The 4th point was that the inter-Afghan dialogue that takes place, that will give the comprehensive peace agreement, the ceasefire agreement, comprehensive and total peace, ceasefire, and its modalities, how it is to be enforced.
That is going
that
to
was
be
the 4th point.
Agreement,
yes,
right.
that had to come out of the dialogues. The Afghans had to sit down and decide it on their
And that's
selves.
what will ensure lasting peace.
So if Taliban have attacked, so they are well within their rights, because the ceasefire agreement has not been signed. It has not even been worked out.
Right. There was just a reduction of violence agreement.
That's right.
And that was for a week. It was extended
that was for a
over
week.
the weekend. Right.
And that to show that because the USA demanded that we don't know that your field commander, they are demanded from the Taliban, that we don't know whether your field commanders listen to us. You are the political wing and you are talking to us and negotiating, but we don't know whether your instructions will be implemented by the field commanders. So they had to prove their credentials, and they did prove that by a ceasefire, this sort of reduction of hostilities from 22nd February to 29th February. But once the peace agreement was signed, then that clause was actually outlived its utility.
But the US expects the Taliban to continue with the reduction of violence, to reduce the violence, to facilitate the way for peace talks, sir.
I do agree. But you see, when the chips are drawn, you know, all agreements create a good faith. They create a sort of roadblock for moving forward. And if those things which are vital to that agreement, the written word of it, if they are not followed, then all these troubles takes place. Because once the United States represented had signed the agreement, which very clearly said, and if you write, I can read it out from somewhere, that this has to complete by 10th. On 10th, the Afghan dialogue has to start, inter-Afghan dialogue, and by that time, this prisoner swap has to take place. If Afghan government thinks, the present Afghan government thinks it's something else, then it has to be settled with United States. Taliban have nothing to do with it.
Because the present Afghan government in the last 18 months has not even been a part of these discussions.
That's true.
It's purely been between the Taliban and the United States.
That's right. So much so that they were not even allowed to enter this where the peace agreement was signed. They wanted to. The Afghan government delegation was there, but they were not allowed to enter that area where the agreement was signed.
Right. So in effect, there's no agreement at all between anything the Taliban say and the Afghan government.
That's right.
Now it seems like now the Taliban in the last 24 hours have conducted 33 attacks in 16 of Afghanistan's provinces, 34 in total. And we mentioned these numbers earlier. This just happened right after the signing of the peace deal. So it seems as if the Taliban are using their attacks as leverage to gain further leverage with the Afghan government. The Afghan government is using the refusal to do the prisoner swap prior to 10th March as their leverage. And it just seems like both sides are sort of leveraging their own individual positions to get a better deal or put more pressure?
You're right. Actually, this will continue until the actual ceasefire agreement is worked out. This will continue. And as I said, that the role of United States is very important. You just mentioned that President Trump talked to Mullah Ghani brother for 35 minutes. So as a result of it, some change should have taken place, but no change took place. Rather, the United States forces carried out an airstrike on the Taliban positions. So in fact, instead of putting some water on the fire, they have actually lit it more. They have put more fuel in it. If Taliban had attacked those 16 attacks that you mentioned, at least US should have held back, and they should have prevailed on the Afghan government that this is the agreement. And I'm sure this Salme Khalilzad didn't sign that agreement on his own. He must have discussed it with the Afghan government, Ashraf Ghani and co. And if it was the understanding that this swap will take, this should have taken place. And why did the Afghan president had to say that we will not release them until the intra-Afghan dialogue starts?
Right. Now, what President Trump says about his conversation with Mullah brother is that I had a very good talk with the leader of the Taliban. He didn't name him. And Mullah brother said that he called on President Trump not to allow anyone to take actions that violate the terms of the agreement, thus embroiling you even further in this prolonged war. So along the lines of what you're saying, violating the terms of the agreement, which presumably would have been done with the knowledge of the Afghan government, like you're saying.
This is exactly what I just said, what Mullah Ghani brother said. Actually, I'm really surprised. Afghans have really matured, this Afghan leadership. They are fully conversant with the diplomatic nuances. And these words are very selected. If you read each word of these carefully, he's reminding them that please look at the document and see what are your responsibilities and please fulfill them. And I would like to read, I don't remember things so clearly, but I really admire these words from Mullah Ghani brother. He said, he called on Trump not allow anyone to take actions that violate the terms of the agreement, thus embroiling you even further in this prolonged war. These are very, very nice and selected words. And it is a sort of caution in it, that this is a very fragile agreement. Please make sure that you keep your part of the deal so that we can keep our part of the deal. And this is what both sides have to see.
Right, exactly. At this point, I'd like to also invite Ms. Amna Khan, who we were earlier trying to connect with on Skype. Amna Khan, are you with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm finally with you, speaking to you from a phone, yes.
Great. So I just now continuing with the discussion that I was just having with Air Commodore Saab about the sort of different positions right now that the Taliban and the Afghan government have, where there's attacks by the Taliban and the Afghan government, President Ghani is not releasing the prisoners. He's saying that it is not in the authority of the United States to decide. And he said that the issue cannot be a precondition to the peace talks and will have to be worked out in negotiations. This is sort of throwing a spoiler in this whole process. And what would you like to, in your opinion, say about that?
This is not the first time that Kabul, as in President Ghani, has thrown a spanner in the works. If you see previously as well, when talks were there regarding the intra-Afghan talks, and an inclusive team had to be, comprised coming from Kabul, it was President Ghani, time and again, who created hurdles while he was not creating an inclusive team. He kept on putting members of his political faction and people that he favored in those talks, and hence the talks could not take place, the intra-Afghan talks. Similarly, if you see recently, the election results were postponed, and conveniently he decided to announce the results of the elections just prior to the peace agreement. So it is unfortunate to say, but I think Kabul is one of the biggest obstacles to the peace process. And by Kabul, I mean national reconciliation and national reintegration. If you see time and again, President Ghani keeps on creating hurdles. He mentioned the other day that he had issues regarding the peace agreement, then these questions regarding the release of prisoners. I personally feel that I think if President Ghani is sincere in moving forward and attempting to deliver peace in Afghanistan, he has to then be open to compromises, which unfortunately, as we see, he's not. And I've said time and again that while President Ghani may be, as the Taliban claim to be, a puppet of the U.S., but he does have nuisance value and he can create problems as he's doing now. And whether we like it or not, Kabul has to be on board whenever any agreement, or for that matter, any policy is being implemented. So I think the Americans will have to speak to President Ghani because it's interesting, all the other political factions, including Abdullah, even people like Hikmatyar, Dostum, they are all willing to move forward with the Taliban, particularly when it comes to an inclusive interim setup, because they have echoed these sentiments before. It has only been President Ghani's team that has been against this particular policy.
Right, and it seems as if the Taliban is showing a lot of flexibility on their part. They've agreed to sort of have share power in an inclusive government, and we've seen recently statements from their leaders, articles, etc., that they want to have an inclusive sort of an agreement, and this has been resisted by the Taliban in the past.
Yes, if you remember, you see, at the offset, particularly when they made their mark, and they made their first political appearance in Moscow, Abbas Tanakzai categorically stated that the Taliban do not envisage a monopoly of power. And that says a lot. At the same time, all the political factions that took part, the Afghans at that time were headed by former President Hamid Karzai, they echoed that both sides, meaning the political factions of Afghanistan and the Taliban, were open to an interim setup. And I think logically, because the elections have been contested by all the political factions, including Abdullah, as well as the Taliban, I think it would be, the right thing would be to have an interim inclusive setup that could have members from all the different political factions, including the Taliban. Basically, everybody gets a piece of the pie, and that means President Ghani too. And it would be an interim setup to see how it works. Because enforcing the election results is not something that is going to happen. The Taliban will not accept it.
Right, okay. And we're also seeing that at the moment the Taliban is in a position of strength, and they're the ones sort of who, they've managed to get the US to come on the table to have talks due to, the fact that they have been doing these attacks, etc. They're the ones in a position of strength. So now the civilians in Afghanistan have long awaited this agreement on peace. They're the ones who've suffered the most. So can the Afghanistan government, can President Ashraf Ghani afford to be doing this right now?
Look, the fact is that you see the Taliban, they have a staying power. The fact that the Taliban have sustained this war proves that the Taliban, whether the international community accepts it or not, are an integral part of the Afghan society. And it shows that the Afghans are not going anywhere. A lot of people in Afghanistan do feel that people or political figures like President Ghani are not really Afghan in nature, if you see it in the other sense of the word. Because at the end of the day, if turmoil does come to Afghanistan, the Taliban are here to stay. People like President Ghani will not come. So this is an important factor. Apart from that, I think, again, the Taliban have an important role to play in Afghanistan. And I think President Ghani, it would be advisable for President Ghani now to show compromises and to accommodate the Taliban. In this way, he could actually be the champion of peace. He did it before, because he has made attempts in this regard. If you remember, he is the one that presented the peace deal just before the Eid ceasefire in 2018. So I think he has an historic opportunity right now to present himself as a peacemaker by accommodating the Taliban and playing a constructive role and not getting into petty politics. If he really does believe in a future for the Afghan people and the Afghan nation, who have suffered tremendously. And again, the Afghan Taliban have been welcomed. This peace agreement has been welcomed within Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan. And I think right now, particularly because of the elections that are coming up, President Trump needs to show some sort of, a victory. And that will only happen if the peace agreement is successful.
Right. Thank you so much for your insights, Ms. Amna Khan. Air Commodore Saab, now what we were just talking about with Madam online, that it's very essential right now going forward that they're on the same page, and we're seeing all these sort of spoilers in the middle. However, at the same time, going forward, the Taliban have also mentioned that they want to have a setup with working with all parties concerned, but without any predetermined outcome, was their words, meaning that it should be fair and it should be in the interest of all Afghans. And they also wish for the Afghans who to be repatriated, who had to leave the country as well. That's
right. As I said before, that Afghan leadership, this Taliban leadership, is showing a lot of maturity. You see, they ran for peace from place to place, from Doha to Islamabad to Moscow to Beijing to Oslo I mean all the places, Germany, Berlin, they have been to all capitals.
Which shows a commitment,
yes,
a certain level of commitment.
And in a situation when they were in dominant position, they are controlling 60% of Afghanistan is under Taliban control, and the US the foreign forces are on the retreat. They are barely holding on to their few bases. Even in this, they have not shown any arrogance. Look at their candor and their poise and their dignity and their grace when they were signing. They were clad in a very simple white shalwar kameez. They walked very slowly. They talked very slowly and humanely. So all this shows that they are interested in peace. They have fought, they are fighters, they have fought on the ground, but now that they have sat on the negotiation table, they are with full conviction that they want to go for peace and they want to make it happen.
Every 4 decades of war, everybody has lost somebody.
That is true.
A lot of lives, Afghan lives have been lost.
So this Taliban leadership feels that Afghans should be given a chance for peace and progress, and they will do everything. So they are most interested in making this deal work out. And I think the second interested party is Mr. Trump, because he has everything at stake at this moment. He has orchestrated all this to sort of converge onto this year, which is the election year. And he's taking all this, the drama, the melodrama and the climax to November 2020, towards November 2020.
And he has to have success on this.
So there will be back and forth is all right. He will tolerate it. But I'm sure he's very interested, and rightly so. This is a useless, long war of nearly 19 years, and it should come to an end. It has drained US resources. It has killed their countrymen. And what purpose? What are they gaining out of it?
This is in the middle of the American public becoming more aware that they are lacking in a lot of areas in the United States are lacking in good quality education in secondary schools, healthcare. Americans don't have free universal healthcare like Scandinavian countries, Europe has, and Americans have become a little more aware that this is something, rather than spending trillions of dollars, $3 trillion spent on Afghanistan and Iraq, it could be better spent internally.
You are very right. These things have been noticed by the American public, and it's in their knowledge. The difference is that now these are being debated 24 hours. All these candidates who are coming in droves to the American presidential candidates, so they are talking these issues and they are blasting these issues. So he has to actually make sure that he first fulfills his pre-election promises, and that will give him a boost if he is able to do it, and I hope he is able to do it. So these are two parties, the Taliban themselves and the US government under Mr. Trump want a peace to take place. They want the foreign forces to go as soon as possible. I feel that even less than 14 months they will go out, because Mr. Trump would perhaps want it to, all this melodrama, all these optics, the American soldiers descending from the planes from Afghanistan and their wives and children hugging them. So that drama has lot of its optics is great.
It has a huge
so he
effect,
will not miss it. He's master of optics, and he'll make sure that till November this goes, and one by one all these aircraft come and the 500, 400 soldiers descend from them, and that makes a public decent optics for it.
Right.
So
We
the
have
third
with us-
party which
sir.
is not interested is Ashraf Ghani. And he is on quicksand, he is on shifting grounds because his own presidency is in doubt. There is Abdullah breathing down his neck,
Yeah.
and he says that I am the president, you are not the president. So in this background, he should be sensible.
Right.
He should let peace happen.
Right.
I
We
hope
have
so.
with us online Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai, who's a senior analyst. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
Sir, now that we're talking about the situation with the recent attacks that have taken place by the Taliban against Afghan forces, and also the reluctance of President Ghani of the prisoner exchange before the peace talks in Oslo on the 10th, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in the United States, he said it's going to be a rocky and bumpy ride ahead, and it will be a difficult conversation that's going to happen between the Taliban and the Afghan government. And at the same time, our Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has said that President Ghani should show magnanimity in the larger national interests, and the Taliban should also show flexibility. Sir, your feedback on this?
Yes, I think that there are problems. Everybody was aware there would be challenges. It can't be easy to end the war after such a long time. So I believe that, these problems which are being encountered have to be resolved through cooperation. And as we have seen, President Trump spoke to Mullah Abdul Ghani Biradar by phone in Qatar. That shows, I think, his commitment that this peace agreement should be implemented. Otherwise, it will be very damaging for him politically in the U.S. Because he's already being accused of giving too much space to Taliban. He would be accused of signing an unworkable agreement. For the Taliban, it's very important that they stay the course. They have already resumed attacks against the Afghan forces, and now that the U.S. has carried out an airstrike against Taliban in Helmand, we could also see maybe some attacks by Taliban against the U.S. forces. So there are, these new developments which are threatening the peace agreement, but I still believe that it would not be scrapped. They would try to make it work.
Right. Earlier, Air Commodore Basit was saying how the U.S. is probably going to want to withdraw quickly the maximum number of troops before the upcoming elections. Having said that, in the past, when territories like this have just been left and further sort of human development, etc., has not taken place in those areas, we've seen that trouble erupted again. So how important is it now? Even the Taliban have invited the U.S. to participate in the reconstruction process after the peace agreement. How, in your opinion, how essential is that going to be?
I think Taliban and the U.S., they both realize each other's strengths and weaknesses. As we know, President Trump wants to withdraw his forces, about 5,000, and another 5,000 from the other NATO member countries by May, which means in 4.5 months, as agreed in the agreement. So that, I think, will be the goal now. He may do it because that will send a message to his supporters in the U.S. that he is fulfilling the promise he made in the election campaign. It's very important for his, re-election that he shows that he means what he says. But I think that, the U.S. has already calculated that the remaining 8,600 American troops and an equal number or a bit more of the forces from the other NATO member countries, along with their very strong air force, would be enough to keep the Taliban at bay and to prevent the cities from falling to Taliban. So that, I think, would be the purpose right now. But the full withdrawal will take place 14 months. And that, I think, is a long time because we don't know what is going to happen in these 14 months.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, who is a senior analyst. Now, as a final remark on this segment, sir, I'd like to just ask you that going forward, we're talking about human resource, human development in Afghanistan in regions which are prone to conflict. How essential is that to build on their education and employment, because it's a disenfranchised people who end up joining militant organizations?
That's true. Actually, see that they have been, since last 40 years, they have been at war. And at war with whom? The greatest superpowers of the world. Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
And America and 60 other countries with them. So this was a poor country before also, and this war has totally decimated. We hosted 4 million Afghans during the peak of the hostilities, and still I think 2.5 million Afghans are still there with Pakistan. So the populace has been dislodged, their whole economic activity has been sort of fragmented and blasted. So they have to rebuild, and rebuild it brick by brick, and Americans have a part to play in it. And it is actually enshrined in the document that has taken place, that after all these steps, the 4 steps that I have taken, then they will participate in the sort of reconstruction of Afghanistan. And they will actually remove all the sanctions. The UN, Afghan, there are so many sanctions from the United States.
Taliban.
Though Americans, there's a whole clause of American commitments. And this is their commitment, that they will get all the sanctions removed from the United Nations, and they will work for the reconstruction. And all these sanctions against some of the Afghan leadership, you know, some of them were proclaimed offenders and all that. So all those things have to be ironed out.
Absolutely.
So this is the part of Americans' responsibility. They will do it. And I hope with the American resources and their interest in Afghanistan, when they withdraw their forces, they would like to sort of help out Afghans for their reconstruction and prove their presence that way, rather than having soldiers on the ground.
Right, absolutely. And hopefully Afghanistan will also become a responsible member of the international community, as the Taliban have already expressed their wish. Now, going on to our next story, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has joined in the efforts to challenge the Citizenship Amendment Act in the Indian Supreme Court. Now, the Indian authorities have rebuffed this action by saying that it is an internal Indian matter. Air Commodore Saab, I'd like to now ask you about this particular situation that we're seeing in New Delhi. Now you're seeing that the UN is taking an active role, and we yesterday saw very strong statements from the Iran Foreign Minister Javad Zarif about this, and we saw a statement by OIC envoy who was here, the Secretary General's envoy who was here, saying that they're also concerned about Kashmir, but here we're seeing some actual action which was not taking place earlier.
That's true. Actually, if you see, since the last election in India, and the arrogance of Mr. Modi is on the rise. With every event, his arrogance is rising. When I say Mr. Modi, Ajit Doval and Mishra and all this elite, this triumvirate which is ruling India. And this Delhi massacre which took place, the riots which took place, was, I think, the last straw. And you must have seen how widely it was covered by the foreign media. And it was a tale of atrocities and real criminal activities right under the eyes of the police and soldiers.
Right.
So and the world conscience.
In the world of social media now, where everything is documented by phone cameras and all, and then immediately put on social media, you can't hide these things anymore.
That's right. So while the Indian clout with the Western capitals, due to their economic strength and their strategic alliance with US, bars them from coming very openly, still there are very strong voices and of conscience, and these voices are now gaining momentum. And what you mentioned about the UN's Commissioner for High Commissioner for Human Rights going to the court for that, this is a step in that direction. And I think I'm very happy that the Foreign Minister of Iran came out very clearly, categorically. He said
this is a very good friend of India's.
This is a very good. Two of them, Mahathir Mohamad perhaps even lost his job. The palm oil trade was, India was major importer of their palm oil, which is their mainstay of their economy. and India straight away sort of retaliated by saying that we will not import any more palm oil from you. And now Mahathir has lost his job. Perhaps behind the scene activities from the Indian has played a part in that. And now Iran, again, India was a major, I think second biggest importer of Iranian oil, if not the first.
Right.
But still, so these are the voices of conscience which are sort of speaking. They are few, but with the passage of time, as the Indian intransigence is increasing, as their arrogance is increasing, these voices are gaining momentum, both domestically and on the international front.
Right. Now, sir, going forward now, we've seen that the mob violence in New Delhi has killed 46 people and hundreds of people have been injured. The numbers, a lot of people are claiming, have been understated. There are many, many more. And what you're seeing in New Delhi is a situation where you have Aam Aadmi Party that's ruling there. However, the police is controlled by the central government, which is not the same as in the rest of India. So which is the reason why the police have sort of taken a back seat and they haven't come to the aid of Muslims, the ones whose mosques and houses have been burning, who've called for help, and all these killings have taken place.
What is very surprising, that till date, nobody from BJP, starting from Muri to the lowest level of their leadership, has said anything against it. They have not condemned. So they are actually owning it up. In a way, by not condemning it, they are owning up.
Rather, they've been
they are accomplices.
The accomplices, and the Home Ministry is in charge of the police, and that's
right.
Amit Shah.
That's right.
And he's the one responsible for restraining these mobs, etc. But they've been given a free hand.
Yeah.
And they've also been fueling it with their hate speech.
That's right. So I think this has actually gone too far, and this CA and NRC has actually, what they were trying to contain the uprising in Kashmir, but their steps have actually made the whole India foment with disruption and mistrust. And this is any government which wants to progress, wants peace and harmony. No government in its right mind would create this turmoil, because look at their economic parameters. From a double-digit growth, they are now barely managing 4% growth. So the people are losing their jobs. The farmers are committing suicide. Their soldiers are committing suicide. They are fratricide among their troops. So much of discontentment is there. I don't know why, if any sensible leadership would take notice of this and take some steps to change course and sort of curb these disturbances and go to a more peaceful path where economic progress can take place. But this government is actually too enamored with their power. They say that all power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the intoxication with power has perhaps corrupted this whole government to that extent that they can't see what is written on the wall.
And at the moment, there's no end in sight, because there are other BJP-ruled states which have large Muslim populations, like Uttar Pradesh, the neighboring state. There's still a danger for Muslims all over India for this to spread. So thank you so much, Air Commodore Basit Saab, for joining us on our program today. And moving on to our next story about the Pakistani writer Khalilur Rahman Qamar, the comments that he made on a news channel against human rights activist Marvi Sarmad were extremely condemnable, and social media, civil rights activists, and most of the citizens of Pakistan have condemned the words and the language that were used against this lady, because whatever the differences in opinion are over a specific subject, nobody should be hurling abuses and derogatory languages at a woman like that, or at anybody for that matter. And also the anchor person who was in charge of that program needed to contain that, which failed to happen, and due to that, PEMRA has now issued a show cause notice to this TV channel, Neo News, and for the use of vulgar language. So it is the responsibility of television networks to make sure that nobody is harmed on their programs, and derogatory and misogynistic language against women is never ever allowed, or against anyone for that matter. That's all the time we have for our program today. Thank you for watching Newsroom, and we will see you next time. Inshallah, that's tomorrow.